Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the honourable members for their comments. Singapore continues to be safe, secure. We were ranked number 1 in the Gallup Global Law and Order Report of 2017. The Economist Intelligence Unit's Safe Cities Index ranked us second behind Tokyo. Public's trust and confidence in the home team continues to be high. 97% of our residents feel safe walking home alone at night. Overall crime and drug situation remains under control. Crimes such as robbery, housebreaking, snatch thefts registered an all-time low in 2017, and number of drug abusers arrested decreased in 2017 compared with 2016. Fire incidents are at their lowest in 40 years. Recidivism rates have improved, as have the road safety and immigration offending situation. So overall, the situation in 2017 on the security front was, I would say, better than previous years, and compared to the rest of the world, many other similar cities, in a good situation. Achieving those results, securing a safer Singapore, requires efforts from many different people. If you look at the growing terrorism threat, we have to deal with it on multiple fronts. It also means building up our capabilities to protect our people. So MHA's budget has increased by more than 10% this year. A large part of that increase is going to go into enhancing our counterterrorism capabilities efforts. It's because the threat of IS remains high and, in fact, will continue to grow as fighters from the Middle East come back to this region. MHA must and will do all it can to protect our people. It is our responsibility and accountability to deal with terrorist threats within Singapore. As members may know, under our system, legal framework, and constitutional structure, MHA is responsible for home front and internal security, including counterterrorism, crisis, and consequence management. When a terrorist attack happens, MHA is therefore overall responsible, will be in charge and lead the national response. Police will manage the incident on the ground and will be the first and main responders. If the scale of the attack is very large, MHA may also ask SAF to provide support to the police as an auxiliary force. Likewise, MHA may also ask other ministries, agencies like Ministry of Health to support the operations. To this end, the police and SAF have developed joint plans and conducted joint exercises. We are, of course, very appreciative for the SAF's commitment and the commitment of other agencies to support the home team in such situations. This modus operandi has been discussed and agreed for some time, and as I said, it follows a constitutional structure and practice that we have adopted over many decades. And I made this clear in 2016 when I had stated that all operations within Singapore, police will take command, and depending on the nature and the scale of the attack, home team may rely on other agencies who will provide support for us. And these agencies could include, depending on the nature and scale of the incident, SAF, MCI, MOH. For example, if there is a large-scale attack, if police need additional forces beyond the ERTs, the Special Ops Command, SPF may call upon SAF for specialized forces like the Special Operations Task Force. They will also support and reinforce the ERTs and SOC. Exercises have been conducted to make sure that these plans are sharpened and we will continue to include other partner agencies in such exercises. Second Minister Josephine Teo will share more on how the Home Team is countering the terrorist threat. I will now speak on three areas. First, ensuring that our criminal justice system stays relevant and effective. Second, preventing religious extremism and segregationist thinking. And third, maintaining our tough stance against drugs. The other office holders will deal with the other points. First, on the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system, we seek to amend the Criminal Procedure Code. The bill is in Parliament, the Evidence Act, and later this year we will amend the Penal Code. The detailed proposals on the amendments to the Criminal Procedure Code, CPC, I will cover in my second reading speech. I told the House in January that we have embarked on a comprehensive review of the Penal Code. We set up a committee in July 2016 to this end to undertake a fundamental review, to look at the principles which underlie our laws, what offenses could be covered, what are the punishments should be, and whether the current punishments are appropriate. It's quite a broad review. The committee aims to complete its work in a few months' time, and we will invite feedback from the public. Significant focus of the Penal Code review would be enhancing protections for vulnerable persons, children, people with mental disabilities, domestic workers. Mr. Ang Wei Ning spoke about this. We have seen cases where such persons are violently treated, hurt, exploited, even killed by the very people who ought to be protecting them. Many members will know of the case of NEE, as do many Singaporeans, and we can understand the anger that many people felt. There are other cases like this. Recently, the case of a mother who abused her 2-year-old son, and after 2 years, he died from head injuries, assaulted for not being able to recite numbers. Our punishments for these sorts of offenses are generally stiff. We will nevertheless review the punishments and what is the level of proof that is needed for these cases. Mr. Ang Wei Ning spoke about Vulnerable Adults Bill. Our MSF colleagues have been working hard on this, and I understand the bill will be tabled in Parliament soon. Mr. Louis Ng asked about marital rape. That is also under review. Let's be clear, violence against women is wrong. No ifs and no buts on that. So removal of immunity against marital rape is being studied. Second, I want to talk about the process reviews and changes, the steps we are taking to improve our processes. When you look at investigations, our investigative processes will aim to take better care of victims' well-being. In particular, we're looking at investigations and court processes for sexual crimes to better protect victims of such offenses. Mr. D'Souza and Mr. Louis Ng asked about this. I first announced in August 2016 that we were reviewing this. We have listened to the victims to understand their concerns. We have worked with several organizations, MSF, hospitals, courts, NGOs, to improve our processes and the way our officers interact with the victims. Some examples of the changes that have been made, we have selected and started training a group of officers. We call them sexual crime duty officers. They will conduct interviews with victims. We have introduced one-step abuse forensic examination center, or One Safe Center. Victims can also be examined by a doctor on site at CID without the need to shuttle between CID and hospital and having to recount what happened to them once at the hospital and once to the police officers, everything to be done in one place at the One Safe Center. We have developed a training video for our officers on how to question the victims in an empathetic way, and Aware helped us with that. They will then understand and have greater empathy the trauma faced by victims. In June of this year, the police, together with KK Hospital and other partners, will pilot a multidisciplinary interview model. And this would be focused on children who have been sexually abused by family members. It's necessary to gather the facts from these children. But again, one can imagine or understand the stress that such children may undergo if they have to be interviewed separately by police, doctors, child protection officers. Adds to the stress. And so we will seek to integrate these interviews so that the children need not repeatedly recount the traumatic experience. In addition, court processes will aim to better protect victims of sexual assault cases, including automatic protection of identity, closed-door hearings, and questions about the victim's sexual history and unrelated behavior. There will be restrictions on what sort of cross-examination will be allowed, subject to the overall jurisdiction of the courts. And that will be set out when we deal with the legislation. We will define the precise scope, what we are intending to do, and how the process can be taken forward. Another process is the Appropriate Adults Scheme. We started this in 2013 for persons with intellectual disabilities and mental health problems. This was extended in 2017 to support young suspects. Independent volunteers are the appropriate adults. They are trained to provide emotional support to the interviewees. In 2017, the AAs provided support for about 700 interviews during the course of investigations. And the feedback has been positive, both from the volunteers who are appropriate adults, as well as the investigation officers. In April of this year, we will roll out the scheme, the Appropriate Adult Scheme, to more police and CNB units so that it can support more young suspects. And it will also include customs and CPIB. Separately, we are also looking to identify and deal with the basic issues that lead people to crime. Mr. Murali Pillai spoke about involving the community and VWOs and how to deal with offenders with mental health conditions. This is something new in the sense of what I'm going to say. We will introduce a new initiative. It will be called the Home Team Community Assistance and Referral Scheme, or HTCAS. When our officers deal with individuals who have committed offense, often they come across or become aware of other problems and the complex circumstances surrounding these offenders. And as Mr. Murali pointed out, some have medical issues too. And some are struggling to make ends meet. Others have problems with family. So we will have these CAS officers stationed at every police division. So the investigators will deal with the crime solving, if I may call it. The CAS officers will assess whether social interventions are needed to address the underlying issues. Those could be, the interventions could be in the form of counseling. It could be in the form of mental health assistance. It could be in the form of financial assistance. The CAS officers will then refer the offenders to a suitable agency for help and continue to follow up. We are studying this in detail with MSF, and we will try to pilot this at a police division this year. Another important area is how we deal with young offenders. Our approach is that, if you take today, 80% of the youths who are arrested are not charged. Now, 4 out of 5 are not charged. the police will give them a warning and refer them to counseling and other programs. We want to give them a chance to sober up, stay on the right side of the law after that. But there will be cases, as the statistics show, 20%, where we have no choice. We have to take stern action. Some are repeat offenders. Some could be serious offenses like drug taking, trafficking. Such cases, they will be detained, and for punishment, deterrence, and equally important, their own rehabilitation. Reformative training, RT, is an essential, necessary regime for such young people. Within the RT population, we try to group them by risk profile and needs. This helps to provide a more targeted set of interventions. The trainees will go through programs that will help them take charge of their rehabilitation. They can then reflect on their offenses, how to stay crime-free, and how to strengthen their relationships with their family. Prisons will also continue with their education and skills training for the reformative trainees. Those who can will continue to take their N levels, O levels, A levels. There are also vocational training opportunities such as WDA accredited courses. Now we intend to further enhance the RT regime. One of these changes is to reduce the minimum detention period from the current 18 months to either 6 months or 12 months. This is in line with the more targeted approach we want to take because different individuals may require different intensities of intervention and different lengths of rehabilitation. I will speak further about the RT regime during the second reading of the CPC Amendment Bill later this month. My third point, let me deal with religious extremism, segregationist thinking. Mr. D'Souza spoke about this. The older generation, who are getting increasingly older, will remember the turmoil of the 50s and 60s. We don't want to go back to those days. For many countries, that is their current reality. What we have today, the racial religious harmony, has been achieved through decades of deliberate, sustained intervention and the government working hand in hand with various stakeholders. It's a constant work in progress. You never say you have arrived, and you can slide back quite quickly. So how do we prevent segregationist teachings from taking root? We have a number of approaches: social intervention, regulatory framework, and constant working with community organizations, grassroots, getting the message across. For example, in terms of social intervention, or ethnic integration policy in our public housing. Our schools are integrated. National Service puts our young men together. These deliberate interventions mean that we grow up together, build collective memories together, and we come together as Singaporeans instead of forming ethnic or religious enclaves. And this shows in the way we live our daily lives, such as eating together at the same table, working together in the same offices. One example of the approach, or the result of the approach, Straits Times recently featured Masjid Khalid, a mosque in Juchat, which distributes oranges and greeting cards to business owners and residents in the area during Lunar New Year. It's just one of the many examples we see on the ground. We have to preserve the harmony, and to do this, we cannot let extremist, segregationist teachings infiltrate our communities. Even a small number of persons propagating radical segregationist beliefs can be dangerous. As Mr. Chong Ki Hyong pointed out, inflammatory viral potential of such beliefs is increased with social media. It is challenging, but we work closely with community groups, religious organizations. We want to try and better inoculate our community from such influences. And the efforts extend to online as well. For example, the Religious Rehabilitation Group has produced online videos to explain why ISIS's ideology goes against Islamic teachings. Offline, in the physical world, when we have foreign preachers who want to come into Singapore, and if we know that they have advocated violence or spread ill will towards other religions, whether in Singapore or elsewhere, they will not be allowed to speak here. This applies to all religions. September of last year, we banned 2 foreign preachers, Christian. They wanted to speak in Singapore. One of them had described Allah as a false god. He had asked for prayers for those held captive in the darkness of Islam. He insinuated that Buddhists were lost people who could be saved by converting to Christianity. The other preacher had variously referred to the malevolent nature of Islam and Muhammad, saying Islam was not a religion of peace. This is all unacceptable. And we said, no, they cannot come in to preach. That was September 2017. A month later, in October 2017, we said no to 2 foreign Muslim preachers. One was Mufti Ismail Menk, and the other is Haslin Baharim. They wanted to come into Singapore to preach on a religious-themed cruise. Some have said that the government overreacted. What is wrong with Mufti Meng telling Muslims that wishing non-Muslims Merry Christmas or Happy Deepavali is the biggest sin and crime that a Muslim can commit? What's wrong with him preaching that? Our decisions are carefully considered. Mufti Menk is a preacher who has been systematically putting out messages like, there are people who are very big enemies of Islam, and if you attend their functions, you will be seen as rubbing shoulders with them. There are thousands of reasons why Islam is more authentic and valuable, that Christianity is just a bubble that is blown such that you feel emotionally high. If you look at all his teachings, the main message that comes out is quite clear, and the divisiveness is not acceptable. At the same time, we are also not immune to Islamophobia. June of last year, after the news of the detention of Shakaiza Zara al-Ansari was reported, we had an Indian man scolding a Muslim lady who wore a tudung on a bus, saying that Muslims should stay in Iraq as they did not the value of staying in Singapore. So far, these incidents are few and far between. They are contained. Most Singaporeans don't behave like this, and there is a good reason why. It's because of the approach of the government and the people of Singapore. But we need to keep close watch on this. We must not allow the threat of terrorism to, on the other side, breed fear, suspicion, and distrust of each other. Mr. Chong Ki-hyong spoke about the role of the community. Our community leaders have done much to foster respect and understanding between the communities. The IRCCs is one example. The IROs is another. Our religious leaders play a big role in leading by example. A wonderful example is the Mufti of Singapore, Dr. Muhammad Fatris Bakram, who shares in other communities' celebrations like Deepavali and Christmas, and regularly offers festive greetings in private and public, including Chinese New Year last month. Another example is the Anglican Bishop, Renis Ponaya, who hosted an annual Christmas tea at his official residence. Not just Anglicans attending, there were Catholics, Lutherans, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists. They were invited to join in, and they joined in. The Singapore Buddhist Lodge donates rice and funds to mosques during Ramadan every year for the breaking of fast, to be distributed to needy families. This was initiated by the late President, Mr. Lee Bok Guan, both to help the needy and to promote interreligious harmony. There are numerous examples. I've just identified a few. It is the respect of different faiths, the willingness to share in each other's lives, that nurtures a harmonious, common living space. Let me now move to our stance on drugs. Mr. D'Souza, Mr. Bayam King, Mr. Desmond Chu, Mr. Edwin Tong spoke about the global challenge. The results from a 2016 National Council Against Drug Abuse survey shows a slightly worrying trend. Our young people are adopting a slightly more open attitude towards drugs compared with a similar survey done 3 years earlier, 2013. Especially towards cannabis. I think the internet, the social media, the pro-legalization lobby in the US are telling them it is cool and it is safe to take cannabis. But if you look at the research, well-supported research, it tells us that cannabis is harmful, especially in teenagers, because it can cause irreversible brain damage. We have to stay firm in this fight against drugs. We are also studying how we can enhance the MDA, Misuse of Drugs Act, to deal with new threats. Over the past year, the drug situation in the world has continued to worsen. The US declared that the opioid crisis they face is a public health emergency. The US National Center for Health Statistics estimated that almost 64,000 people died from drug overdose in 2016. 64,000 people, that number is more than the number of US soldiers who died in the Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq wars combined. It's more than the number of people who have died through breast cancer in the US. It's more than the number of people who have died of HIV and AIDS-related deaths in the US at the peak of the epidemic. The media has covered extensively on how big pharma, poor regulation, irresponsible proliferation of poor quality research, often funded by the pharma companies, have all combined to create this crisis. In May 2017, the US federal court found top executives from Purdue Pharma guilty of misleading regulators, doctors, patients about the risks of OxyContin, which is a powerful and addictive opioid. They earned billions from their deception. Patients graduated from snorting or injecting the crushed pills, then turning to heroin and other drugs to feed their addiction. Despite the harm caused by drugs, some countries have been softening their stance. Countries such as Portugal have decriminalized drug use, and they have received international attention for this approach. And there are some people here who tell us Portugal is a great example to follow and shows why our approach is wrong and Portugal's approach is right. But do the facts bear that out? And what are the lessons for us from the Portugal situation? First, Portugal started with a serious public health problem on its hands. It had many heroin abusers. They were sharing contaminated needles, and they were spreading diseases like hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV. More than half of HIV infections were drug-related, which was the highest rate in the European Union. Portugal then decided to decriminalize drugs. It increased funding for treatment facilities. It provided for needle exchange and opioid substitution therapy. It ran campaigns, say no to secondhand syringe. These measures have helped Portugal reduce HIV and hepatitis infections. But when you start with serious HIV-related problems, hepatitis infection-related problems, arising through drug use, contaminated needles, then I suppose you ask yourself which is the lesser evil, and you go for decriminalization, and then you try and reduce the problem somewhat. But we are not in that situation, thankfully. And there are trade-offs from Portugal's approach. The lifetime prevalence of drug use in Portugal has increased since decriminalization. Surveys now indicate that more Portuguese students are trying drugs, and the number of drug-related deaths have also gone up since 2011. So you will not find all these facts from the people who advocate that we go down the route of Portugal. Portugal decided to decriminalize drugs in a situation where perhaps it concluded that it was not possible or unrealistic for it to control the drug situation. Situation we have in Singapore is different. Our approach has been effective and has worked well for us. We are one of the few countries where the drug situation has been under control, and perhaps the country that has been most effective in dealing with the problem. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, can I display a slide on the screen, please? This, we can have many slides, but this sort of shows you what the trends have been over a period of time in terms of drug use. And if we ignore the downward blip for a period when people abuse Subutex, then you see that it's probably a fairly smooth curve. There was not a real dip in certain years because people were using Subutex. And then we outlawed that, and then they went back to other drugs. The number of drug abusers we have in Singapore is relatively low compared with some of the other jurisdictions. For example, the number of opiate abusers in Singapore is less than 30 per 100,000 people. In Portugal, the number is almost 500. In the US, the number is 600, 20 times our number. In Portugal, it is, just under 20 times. And the numbers will grow further in the US because of the move towards legalization in many states. Intravenous drug use is not a significant mode of HIV transmission in Singapore. So you think of the lives that have been saved, the misery, the deprivation, the loss. We have saved a lot of people from that, if you just look at that slide. From something near 7,000 people being arrested per year to something in the region of 3,000 plus being arrested now. If you take that as 3,000 to 4,000 lives per year over a 20-year period, it's a lot of lives. A lot of people who have been served from drugs. This result has been possible because we have been tough on drugs, and we should not ease up. You look at the cases, anecdotally. Just this Monday, CNB arrested a trafficker in a drug bust. During the investigations, officers discovered that, and it was a lady, she was a caregiver to a toddler. She had left him with two other suspected drug traffickers. Concerned about the toddler's safety, CNB and police then moved quickly with operations the very next day to take down two suspects. The young child was rescued, is now with Child Protection Services. How old is a child? 1 year old. In that 1 year, the young child had already been abandoned by his mother, who is on the run for drug offenses, and being passed around between drug traffickers. Now, these are not isolated cases. In many other countries, these are par for the course. We don't want to get there. In another case, a drug addict father abused his baby daughter, very cruel, regularly biting her. One day he was furious because he had no money to buy drugs. The baby cried, as babies do. He shoved her against the wall so hard her skull fractured. She was 10 months old, not old enough to defend herself. These are the victims of drugs. The activists light candles for traffickers outside Changi prison. They write emotive stories. They dream up about their lives. But who cares for these very real victims? How many young lives have we saved with our policies? Would you hear a squeak from the activists about these people? The actual victims of burglaries, house breakings, families torn apart through drugs, the physical violence, the mental abuse, and by a process of estimation, the number of people who have been saved from that, the shootings and the killings that take place in other countries where drug abuse is prevalent. The 60,000 people who died through opioid abuse doesn't capture all the deaths in the US. There are many more gangland violence with drugs as the underlying cause. The shootings with guns, weapons. You have another case in Singapore, 9-year-old boy living with his abusive aunt. He saw her doing drugs. He ran away because he was scared of being beaten again when she was under the influence of drugs. But she found him, hit him, burnt him with a lighter, picked him up, and dangled him out of a third-story window. Our CNB officers recently came across another abuser, 7 months pregnant, still smoking ice. She already had a previous miscarriage because of her ice habit. But her addiction was so strong, she persisted anyway at the expense of her unborn, innocent child. And again, from foreign jurisdictions, you see cases where children are born with addiction inbuilt. And they need and they crave for heroin from the time they are born. Who speaks for these defenseless victims? As I said earlier, the self-styled activists refuse to talk about how the addiction of hundreds of abusers is fed with each shipment that these traffickers bring in. How many families suffer as a result of drugs? Our penalties are severe because we want to deter such offenses, not because we take any joy in enforcing them. No one can take any joy in enforcing them. Our regional drug situation remains challenging. The region is home to the Golden Triangle, which is the largest meth market in the world. Trafficking of heroin and meth in this region alone is estimated to generate over US $32 billion annually. It is a very lucrative business. It's not going to go away. So let's not kid ourselves. International criminal syndicates operate in this region, attracted by the profits. Being a major transport and commercial hub makes us susceptible, both as a transit point and as an import market because of the wealth factor. It's beyond our ability to change factors outside of Singapore. What we can do is to try and deter criminals from attempting to bring drugs into Singapore. And we have to be firm in resisting those who try to force their ideologies on us. Parliamentary Secretary Amrin will elaborate on how we are working with various stakeholders on this. Thank you, sir.